They shot and stabbed Capodistrias to death.
Oh my freaking continuation. Greek War of Independence.
In 1827, the tides of the revolution
loving
had
this
turned back
series,
in the
loving
Greeks'
this
favor,
series
as
a
the
lot.
three titans, Britain, France and Russia, finally came to their aid. However, regardless of his scope of his new enemies, Sultan Mahmud II was still resolved to grind his rebellious peasants to dust. Welcome to our fourth and final episode on the Greek War of Independence, where we'll cover the decisive naval battle at Navarino, the final stages of the military conflict, and the political maelstrom which would determine the modern Greek nation-state's place in the international community for centuries to come. But as well as states, people have their place in the world.
Sponsor.
Suzerainty of the... You can get the off. Of 1827 of the year. In the summer...
Speakly, Loki off topic. I heard Speakly is like really good. I never tried it though.
1827,
I considered
Britain,
it.
France and Russia had signed a joint agreement to establish Greece as an autonomous nation under the loose suzerainty of the Ottoman Sultan. However, defiant in the face of outside nations interfering in internal civil unrest within his empire, Sultan Mahmud II unilaterally rejected this and geared up to confront the great powers. On the 7th of September 1827, the combined fleets of the Sublime Porte and Ibrahim's modern Egyptian armada anchored in the Bay of Navarino in anticipation of the arrival of their new foes. Sure enough, less than a week later, a British fleet under one Admiral Edward Codrington anchored a ways outside the harbour, with a French flotilla commanded by Count de Rigny joining it shortly after, and the Russian ships under the Dutch Admiral Lodewijk van Heyden en route. On the 25th of September, the Admirals Codrington and...
What the hell? So French advisors were aiding Egypt. What? Okay.
Rigny parleyed with Ibrahim Pasha on the beach north of Pylos. The two sides were at an impasse. Ibrahim was under orders from the Sultan to attack the Hellenic naval stronghold of Hydra Island, while the Allied admirals were under orders to prevent any further ravaging of Greek lands. Codrington warned Ibrahim that if the Turco-Egyptian ships sailed for Hydra, the Allies would have to sink them all. Ibrahim weighed his options. He was deeply outgunned, as the Europeans had 10 ships of the line, the dreadnoughts of the era, while the Turco-Egyptian fleet only had 3. Thus, the Egyptian Pasha played for time, agreeing for now to keep his fleets in Navarino harbour while he awaited new orders from the port. Satisfied, the British and French admirals sailed away to reprovision, leaving only 2 ships at Navarino Bay to report on Ibrahim's actions. This uneasy ceasefire lasted about as long as one would imagine. The Greeks, for their part, were still fighting on. In the last days of September, Hellenic forces launched a campaign on Patras, and under the leadership of Richard Church, who was kind of doing a redemption arc thing after the debacle at Athens, destroyed a flotilla of 7 Ottoman ships in the Gulf of Corinth.
Holy bro. The Ottoman Navy, bro. The Ottoman Navy just can't stop being disrespected. Low-key though, I wish the Ottomans had colonized a new world. I really wish they did. I would have loved to see an Ottoman new world, honestly. Like, that's one of those things where it's like, man, why couldn't that happen? I always think about that all the time. Like, what if the Ottomans colonized a new world? That would have been so cool, honestly. Instead of freaking having like English Caribbean, French Caribbean, Spanish Caribbean. Imagine we had like a freaking Turkish Caribbean. That would have been cool.
This enraged Ibrahim, who wondered why the Europeans imposed an armistice on him, but allowed his enemies to continue waging war. So he weighed anchor and attempted to sail to reinforce the Ottoman garrison in Patras. But Codrington caught wind of this, and the British ships arrived in time to fire warning shots at them, forcing the Turco-Egyptian fleet back into Navarino Bay. At sea, Ibrahim was hemmed in. However, on land, the Allies had no forces, and the Egyptians still had a mostly unopposed 20,000 strong army. So, leaving his ships, Ibrahim resumed command of his ground forces and began ravaging the Peloponnese once more.
So much for that.
Dogged by Kolokotronis and his guerrilla fighters. By now, Hayden's Russian fleet had joined the British and French squadrons, and it had become clear to all the Allied admirals that either Ibrahim nor the rulers in Alexandria and Istanbul who enabled him would never relent in their desire to grind the Greek rebellion to dust. As the senior admiral of the combined Allied forces, Codrington realized that there was only one recourse left to him. On October 20th, 1827, the combined might of the British, French and Russian navies sailed into Navarino Bay with their gun ports raised, and the battle was...
What the hell? This is like, bro, a couple of years later, the Crimean War would happen. What the? These are the same people who would literally go to fight. Okay, so the Russians, British and French navies are fighting as allies. Then these same people, couple decades later, like 2 decades later, bro, some of these people here would have most likely had, like, eventually, like, most likely fight each other. Most likely, like, some, especially if they're like young sailors, right? Who are the Russians and the British and the French? They definitely would have had to, like, come to fight each other in the Crimean War. That is wild. How can people just switch up like that? Like, imagine, right? Like you are a sailor right now, and you're like, oh yeah, the Russians, yeah, they're our allies. Couple of decades down the line, it's now like, oh, the French are still our allies, but yeah, those same Russians there, yeah, now they're our enemies. Yeah, now we're fighting in Crimea and invading Russia now. What?
Joined.
I just, it's just insane to me, I guess, how, like, not even, I guess, that is just insane to me how people can just, like, switch up and just, like, go freaking guns blazing at people who were supposed to be their allies like 5 seconds ago. Like, what the hell?
In the end, it was a completely one-sided affair. Outgunned and outmatched.
And the Ottomans were their enemies. So it's like, bro, so it's like the Ottomans who were their enemy are now the French and British allies in the Crimean War. And it's like, wait a minute, you guys were just blowing our ships apart like a good couple decades ago. And you guys might be saying, oh, well, 20 years is kind of a long time. 20 years is not really that long. When you think about it, 20 years is not that long. I mean, like, for all my older viewers, right? I mean, I'm sure you guys can remember like 20 years like it was yesterday. Like, I'm telling you, like, 20 years is not that young. Even like for me, like 10 years, bro, it still feels like I just arrived in America like 10 years ago, right? And I was a kid then, right? Sometimes I can't even accept the fact that I'm about to be 20 in freaking April. I'm like, I'm 20. Like, I still feel like a freaking 14-year-old kid, 14-year-old teenager, right? So, 20 years is not really a long time, really and truly. Let's be real.
Over 60 Egyptian and Ottoman ships were consigned to the bottom of Navarino Bay, condemning over 6,000 hands to drown with them. In contrast, the Allies suffered less than 200 fatal casualties and lost no ships. Mehmet Ali's modern navy, the pride of invincible Egypt, had been obliterated, and as a result, an absolutely crippling blow had been dealt to Sultan Mahmud II. After the Battle of Navarino, the result of the Greek War of Independence was set in stone. For 6 long years, the fate of Hellas had been hanging in the balance, but now Greece would be free. However, the Greek nation, if one could even call it that at this point, was in dire straits. After the 3-year spree of Ibrahim's marauding, the land was utterly desolate, while factional squabbles between revolutionary warlords had resurfaced. Even with freedom secured, it seemed that the Greeks were destined to remain an impoverished, divided and little people. That is, unless a true ruler could take the reins and pull together the frayed threads that was Hellas.
This is the thing about a lot of independence movements and separatist movements, right? It's like, bro, a lot of these independence movements and separatist movements, it's like, bro, you sure you want to be independent? Like, are you sure? Because if you achieve independence, right, you have to think, economically speaking, would you be able to even be well off as an independent country? You think about it like that. Like, I feel like a lot of these separatist movements, what they should really strive for is autonomy. But outright independence, yeah, nah. I was reading online, actually, on Quora, long time ago. Well, not really a long time, but a bit ago, about whether or not, like, the British Caribbean countries that are independent sovereign states, because some British Caribbean parts are still colonies, some aren't colonies. It's, someone perfectly said it. Someone was like, independence is overrated when you actually think about it, because they used the French Caribbean as an example, right? And they were like, well, the French Caribbean stayed a part of France, and look at how much money they're making. Look at the average income from the French Caribbean, right? And they were like, when you compare that to the British Caribbean, some countries are, you know, well off, like my country. But then there's other countries that aren't so well off, right? Like, and they perfectly said it, and they were like, well, it's simple because the populations are too small. Like, a lot of these islands have just too small populations to unrealistically sustain themselves, right? And they were basically saying that it probably would have just been much more beneficial to just stay the British overseas territory in the grand scheme of things, right? Because a lot of these people, what they do is they say, oh, independence, we need to be independent, because usually for the lines of ethnicity, race, or something like that, right? Or culture, right? But when you're actually independent, it's like you have to deal with corruption. You got to deal with internal fighting issues, all that. And it really begs the question, like, is independence really all that? Like, do you really want to be independent? So I'm just bringing that up because kings in general have brought that up. And plus, there's a bunch of separatist movements that are going on even to this very day. And, you know, I look at all those separatist movements and I'm like, bro, it's 2025. Like, just go ask your country for autonomy, and like outright independence is kind of low-key. Just like, some places can do it, some places can, but I just think it's best for most places to not do that. All right, let's continue.
It is here that the statesman himself, Ioannis Capodistrias, finally re-enters our story. Back in the summer of 1827, the Greek National Assembly, or what was left of it anyways, had met at Troezen. With allies on the way, Hellas had a future once more, and it was time to put affairs of state back in order. There they had ratified a new national constitution, an amendment to the one crafted by Mavrocordatos at Epidaurus in 1822. More importantly, they unanimously elected Ioannis Capodistrias, by far the most accomplished Greek-born politician in Europe, to serve as leader of the Hellenic state. As one may recall from our first video, when the revolution first broke out in 1821, Capodistrias had been offered a leadership position on account of his vast experience as Russia's chief foreign minister. However, he declined the role, condemning the insurrection as unwinnable folly. He had been wrong about that, but hindsight is 2020. The situation had changed, so when Capodistrias was elected by the National Assembly, he accepted what must have seemed like the role he was destined for. On January 18, 1828, Capodistrias landed in Nafplion. Having been born in the Venetian, then French, then British-controlled island of Corfu, and spent the lion's share of his adult life as a Russian statesman, it was the first time he had set foot in mainland Greece. The first thing he did was persuade the Greek Senate to suspend the constitution and the National Assembly and temporarily give him full powers. Greece, he declared, was not yet ready for democracy. He was wary of the various factions within the Hellenic body politic, who had spent the duration of the war fighting one another more than they had actually fought the Ottomans.
This man is smart. This man is smart.
Did not
I was thinking about the same thing too.
want to have to navigate around the capricious whims of squabbling magnates and warlords just to get anything done. Luckily for him, the National Assembly willingly gave him full control. Capodistrias was a civil servant in every sense of the word. Working from 5 in the morning to 10 at night every day, he utilized his vast state-building experience to rebuild the pillars of Greek society, so thoroughly eviscerated by 6 years of brutal war. To that end, he involved himself in every theater of national reconstruction, developing the foundations of a standard currency, a method of taxation, a legal framework, courts of justice, orphanages and schools, and even a modern quarantine system to fight the typhoid, cholera and dysentery epidemics which had spread like wildfire during the worst years of the war. However, the titanic task of domestic reconstruction was but one of Capodistrias' many challenges. For one thing, there was still technically a war on. Although Ibrahim Pasha's navy had been destroyed, the man himself, alongside 20,000 ground troops, was still active in the Peloponnese. In the summer of 1828, a French expeditionary force landed in the Peloponnese to support the Greeks, who, having previously been on the ropes against Ibrahim Pasha's relentless onslaught, were imbued with a renewed fighting spirit to finally crush the loathsome Egyptian host which had terrorized their homeland so thoroughly. However, Ibrahim knew that the conquest of the Peloponnese was no longer feasible. Despite all the terrors he had inflicted on the Morea, he had not crushed the Greek spirit, and now, with the situation turning decidedly against him, it was time to make a graceful exit. Through the eloquent work of French diplomats in Alexandria, Governor Mehmed Ali agreed to order his son's return home. On the 4th of October 1828, Ibrahim and his Egyptian legions departed the ancient land of Hellas. Over the last 3 years, Ibrahim Pasha had turned the Peloponnese into a barren wasteland. However, in the end, he gained absolutely nothing out of it. After his departure, the bulk of Ottoman-aligned forces in Greece were gone.
And ordered Abraham to conquer. What the hell? What? Wait, Egypt turned on the Ottomans and conquered Syria? What? How did that freaking play out?
And the forts in the Peloponnese, which had been occupied by the Egyptians, fell mainly into French hands. Capodistrias, meanwhile, had been busy doing away with the loose hodgepodge of bandit gangs who had thus far carried the Greek cause, but also proven extremely prone to insubordination and infighting. To that end, he established the Hellenic Army Academy and a regular Greek army corps, which he deployed into central Greece, hoping to take as much land as possible from the Ottomans to strengthen the Hellenic state's territorial claims when the time came to properly define its borders. Certain familiar faces were appointed to spearhead this campaign. In eastern Roumeli, Demetrios Ypsilantis began securing the hinterlands around Athens, while in the west, the old goat Kolokotronis, fighting alongside his British bromance Richard Church, liberated the Gulf of Arta and its surrounding environs. These advances were aided in part by the fact that in April of 1828, Russia had finally launched a full-scale invasion of the Ottoman Empire, which had stretched the Sublime Porte's military capacity to its very limits. However, Capodistrias' relations with his generals were strained, to say the least. His predilection for micromanagement infuriated the military men, who were perfectly capable of leading an army without the constant nagging of this bookish civilian statesman, thank you very much. Capodistrias' quarrels with the likes of Ypsilantis and Church were ultimately indicative of the great statesman's deeply strained relationship with the Greek elites, a schism which would eventually lead to his doom. On December 21st...
No, bro, this guy is perfect. This guy is perfect. What are you doing?
1828, the ambassadors of Britain, France and Russia met on the island of Poros to discuss the borders of the new Greek nation. Whether Capodistrias liked it or not, the future of his people was now in the hands of these three titans, so he had to play ball with them. Capodistrias himself argued that the Hellenic state's borders should extend from Delvina to Thessaloniki, while representatives of the current British Prime Minister, the Duke of Wellington, yes, the Waterloo guy, wanted to confine the Greek state solely to the Peloponnese. In the end, the diplomats at Poros agreed to a border which ran from Arta to the Gulf of Volos, which they argued would be the most practical and easily defendable frontier for young Hellas. Notably not present at the Conference of Poros were any representatives of Sultan Mahmud II, who was still clinging to the increasingly unrealistic prospect of reconquering his erstwhile Rumelian territories. However, the Sublime Porte's tune changed when in September of 1829, the ongoing Russo-Turkish War ended in their defeat, resulting in the Russians annexing more of their Black Sea territory and taking their place as the overlords of the Romanian principalities. His position critically weakened, Sultan Mahmud II finally agreed to accept the terms of the 1827 Treaty of London, whereby Greece would become an autonomous state, but still his tributary vassal. However, for Britain and France this was no longer good enough. To them, Russia's recent gains were threatening, and if Greece remained an Ottoman vassal, no matter how nominally, then it would always remain under the predominant influence of the Tsar in St. Petersburg.
Of course, bro.
So the British and French, influenced in no small part by Capodistrias' political maneuvering, conceived that Greece would not be an autonomous vassal, but a completely independent nation-state, under the equal protection of all three great powers. This decision was ratified in the London Protocol of 1830, which the Russians only reluctantly agreed to, and the Ottomans were in no position to refuse. Thus, the international community welcomed the independent Hellenic nation-state into the fold. In the end, the Greek War of Independence concluded in the same way much of it was carried out, with bloody infighting. That Ioannis Capodistrias had done much for Greece was indisputable, but in his short time in power, his complete mistrust of the Greek elites who had carried the revolution caused him to make several powerful enemies. Among these were the powerful maritime magnates of Hydra and the Maniots under Petros Mavromichalis, two areas of Greece deeply accustomed to localized self-rule. When, in the interest of centralizing the state, Capodistrias forced stringent taxation policies upon them and tried to impose regional governors on them, he was instead faced with an uprising on his hands. In May 1831,
what the heck is with Greece and civil wars? What is with Greece and civil wars?
The Hadriots convened their own national assembly in direct defiance of Capodistrias' government, and declared the Maniot lord, Mavromichalis, to be their president. Even a certain Alexandros Mavrokordatos came out of retirement to support this rival regime. However, Capodistrias put down this rebellion, sinking the Hydriot frigate Hellas in the process. To prevent further insurrection, he had Mavromichalis arrested and imprisoned. This would be his final mistake.
Oh
to
no.
the mafia-like Maniots, such an act was enough to trigger a blood feud, and as such, the Mavromichalis clan resolved to kill the great statesman for the incarceration of their patriarch.
Oh my
On the 9th of October 1831, as the first president of the Hellenic state walked up the steps to the Church of Napoleon to attend the morning service, he found himself confronted by Petros's brother, Konstantis Mavromichalis, and his son, Hiochios Mavromichalis. Without due ceremony, they shot and stabbed Capodistrias to death.
Oh my freaking... Oh!
Immediately afterwards, Greece was plunged into chaos, and all that Capodistrias had accomplished threatened to become undone. In this, the great powers saw opportunity. They had long preferred that Greece be a monarchy rather than a republic. After all, in a still revolutionarily charged Europe, it set a better precedent for their own divinely appointed monarchs. So it was in May of 1832, a German prince, Otto I, was imported from his native Bavaria to Greece and appointed the first monarch of a re-augmented Kingdom of Greece, stabilizing the country once more.
What the? Bro, so basically, like modern Greece is just a byproduct of Western European. I can't even say imperialism because the Ottomans, the Turks aren't even native to the Greek peninsula. Like this is absurd. Like there's no other way to play
When the Kingdom of Greece emerged onto the world stage in 1832, it was small, poor, and ruled by a foreign king who was imposed upon them by three great powers who held significant sway over the young nation's internal politics. Moreover, only a third of all ethnic Greeks in the Ottoman Empire had been liberated, as Hellenes in Cyprus, Crete, Thrace, the Pontus, and beyond remained under the rule of the Sublime Porte. Many Greeks who had once prospered under the Sultan, like the Phanariot merchants, were now no longer able to do so, looked upon in suspicion and disdain. Overall, it was not quite the freedom that Greece had hoped for, but it was freedom nonetheless. No matter the circumstances, the Greeks were the first people to win full independence from the Ottoman Empire, and the modern Greek nation-state they created is the very same which, through trials and tribulations, endures to this day. In the coming months, we'll release the feature-length version of this series, which will include detailed descriptions of a number of battles that happened during the Greek War of Independence. So make sure you are subscribed and have pressed the bell button to see it. Please consider.
That was a good series. That was a very fun series. If you have any series or suggestion like this, because this was a suggestion to me, comment down below. Eventually, I will do it. Consider joining channel membership because I'm not even might, but eventually I will expand that whole channel membership thing so that there's like actual benefits and features and whatnot. I just haven't been able to have time to do that because I've been doing a bunch of other stuff. Not only that, but if you tend to suggest a lot of videos to me, if you join the membership, your suggestions will be done a lot more quicker. And plus, it's just 99 cents per month. So yeah, make sure to like and subscribe. If you're new, like the video. If you're not new, go check out my other reactions on my channel, man. Thank you for watching and goodbye.